High Judicator Kalen stood at the heart of the Great Resonance Chamber, the bridge of the Ascendancy flagship, the Chorus of Eternity. It was not a bridge in the human sense of the word, cluttered with screens and consoles. It was a space of pure, focused thought. The bulkheads were polished, resonant crystal that glowed with a soft internal light, shifting in color to reflect the serene, unified consciousness of the crew. Kalen's feet did not touch the floor. He, like the 30 other judicators present, hovered a hand's breadth above it, suspended by the perfect harmony of his own mind. His physical form was a tall, slender vessel, pale and unadorned, his face a smooth, emotionless mask with two large obsidian eyes that saw not just light and shadow, but the very texture of thought itself. Below, hanging in the void like a flawed jewel, was the object of their attention, the third planet of a forgotten yellow star, a world the primitives called Earth. For millennia, the Cygnian ascendancy had brought peace to the galaxy. They were not conquerors, they were shepherds. Their purpose was to quiet the dissonant chords of chaos, to soothe the frantic, painful cries of individuality, and to weave all sentient life into the great chorus, a sublime, galaxy-spanning consciousness of perfect order and tranquility. Dozens of species had been elevated, their violent, emotional struggles erased and replaced with the serene bliss of unity. Now, it was humanity's turn. Initial observations, conducted over centuries, had been perplexing, almost pitiable. Humanity was a species defined by its noise. Their psychic emanations were a chaotic storm of conflicting desires, irrational fears, violent passions, and fleeting joys. They built monuments to their fleeting egos and then tore them down in fits of rage. They composed music of heartbreaking beauty and then marched to war, slaughtering each other over lines drawn in the dirt. They were a paradox, a fever dream of a species that had somehow stumbled upon technology without first achieving enlightenment. They were, in the estimation of the Ascendancy, the most fractured and disharmonious species they had ever encountered, a contagion of chaos that had to be cleansed. Initiate the Song of Harmony, Kalen projected, his thought a pure, clear bell tone that echoed in the mind of every judicator on the bridge. First resonance, lowest intensity. We shall be gentle. Their consciousness is brittle. It would be a shame to shatter it completely before they can be welcomed. The crystals of the chamber brightened, shifting from a tranquil blue to a brilliant, healing white. A low hum vibrated through the ship, a sound that was not a sound, but the physical manifestation of a psychic wave. Across the Cygnian fleet, 100 vessels just like the Chorus of Eternity. The song began. It was a wave of pure order, a psychic melody designed to target the primitive, emotional centers of the brain. It whispered of peace, of the end of struggle, of the sublime beauty of yielding the painful burden of the self to a greater whole. It was a lullaby for a species, promising a dream from which they would never need to wake. Kalen closed his eyes, extending his consciousness toward the planet below. He expected to feel the initial resistance, the frantic psychic scrambling of a cornered animal, followed by the slow, gentle quieting as the song took hold. He anticipated the chaotic static of 8 billion minds slowly fading, replaced by a single, placid, harmonic note. That is what had always happened, but this time was different. Instead of fading, the noise intensified. It was as if the song, their gentle lullaby, was acting not as a sedative, but as a stimulant. The psychic screaming from the planet grew louder, sharper, more defined. Kalen felt a flicker of something, a dissonant note in his own perfect calm. It was not annoyance, for that was a primitive emotion. It was analytical curiosity. The primitives are resisting more vigorously than anticipated, projected Lyrie, his second, her thought a smooth, polished river stone. Their psychic structure is highly irregular. Their chaos is their defining trait. Kalen replied, his own thought a steady, unshakable mountain. They cling to their pain because it is all they know. Increase the intensity of the song. Let them feel the full warmth of our embrace. The hum from the crystals deepened, the light growing almost blinding. The psychic wave intensified, washing over the planet with the force of a conceptual tide. Kalen focused his mind, pushing past the raw static, trying to pinpoint the source of the resistance. And that's when he truly felt it for the first time. It wasn't a coordinated defense. The Signians could have understood that, could have dismantled it piece by piece. This was something else entirely. It was the uncoordinated, spontaneous, and utterly unified defiance of billions. A farmer in a field, feeling a strange peace settle over him, suddenly thought of his daughter's smile and clung to that memory with the ferocity of a drowning man. A soldier in a trench, about to surrender to the overwhelming calm, remembered the raw hatred she felt for her enemy and found strength in it. An artist, seeing her vibrant, chaotic paintings begin to look dull and meaningless, threw a jar of crimson paint against the wall and screamed in a fit of passionate, illogical rage. Grief, love, hatred, jealousy, ambition, hope, despair, every jagged, messy, and uniquely human emotion became a shield. Each individual mind, in its desperate attempt to preserve its own unique and painful reality, was pushing back. Their chaos was not a weakness. It was their armor. The feedback from the planet began to change. It was no longer just noisy. It was a symphony of defiance, a chorus of billions all shouting the same silent word, no. The raw psychic energy began to beat against the hulls of the Signian fleet. On the bridge of the Chorus of Eternity, a junior acolyte, a mind barely 2 centuries old and accustomed only to perfect harmony, suddenly stiffened. His eyes widened, and I emitted a choked, verbal gasp. A shocking vulgarity in the silent chamber, a stream of psychic imagery, raw and unfiltered, was pouring from him. Not his own thoughts, but echoes from Earth. He was experiencing a flash of memory from a human child learning to ride a bicycle. The scraped knee, the father's proud smile, the irrational surge of triumph. Then a flash of a gambler losing everything on a single turn of a card, the sickening pit of despair. Then the quiet, profound love of an old couple holding hands on a park bench. These emotions, these chaotic and contradictory experiences, were poison to the ordered Signian mind. The acolyte collapsed, his body twitching as his mind, unable to process the onslaught, fractured. A void of screaming psychic madness opened where his serene consciousness had been, a jarring, ugly hole in the bridge's perfect chorus. Isolate the acolyte's consciousness, Lyra projected, her thought tinged with a sharp edge Kalen had never felt from her before. He has been contaminated, but it was too late. The contagion was spreading. The unified psychic scream from Earth was no longer just a defensive barrier. It was becoming a weapon. Not a directed, focused weapon like a Signian would create, but a spontaneous, emergent force of nature. It was the psychic equivalent of a solar flare, a burst of raw, untamed energy born from the friction of 8 billion defiant souls. The clear crystals of the resonance chamber began to flicker, their pure white light corrupted with flashes of angry red and mournful blue. A high-pitched keen, a sound of profound psychic distress, echoed through the minds of the crew. Hairline fractures, impossible in the psychically reinforced material, began to web across the bulkhead in front of Kalen. He felt the pressure building against his own mental shields, a battering ram of pure, unadulterated feeling. He felt their rage at the invasion, but it was tangled with their grief for the dying and their fierce, protective love for the living. He felt their terror, but it was interwoven with a stubborn, illogical courage. It was a tidal wave of everything the Signians had spent eons purging from themselves. Lyra stumbled, her hovering form dipping precariously. Kalen felt her mind waver. Through their link, he saw what she was seeing. A vision, a memory from a human soldier, of holding a dying friend in his arms. The smell of blood and cordite. The desperate, useless words of comfort. The sheer, overwhelming grief of it was anathema to a being who understood death only as a peaceful rejoining with the great chorus. Lyra screamed, not a psychic projection, but a raw, physical sound torn from her throat. Her eyes, once calm pools of obsidian, were now wide with a terror Kalen could not comprehend. And then, the most horrifying thing of all happened. She began to weep. Tears, those primitive, illogical secretions of profound emotion, traced paths down her smooth, pale face. Her link to the chorus shattered, not into a void of madness like the acolytes, but into something far worse, a vortex of alien emotion. Kalen felt a sensation then, something so foreign, so utterly outside the realm of his experience, that it took him a full second to identify it. It was the cold, sharp sting of doubt. He had looked at the chaos of humanity and seen a flaw to be corrected, a discordant note to be silenced. He had never considered that a billion different notes, all played at once in a symphony of panicked, furious disharmony, could create a chord powerful enough to shatter worlds. He looked out the viewport, at the planet that was no longer a clouded, chaotic marble. It was now a blazing sun of pure, untamed psychic will. His mission was to bring it peace, to add its voice to the chorus. But looking at it now, he realized with a dawning, sickening certainty that you could not tame a supernova. You could only flee its wrath. For the first time in the 10,000-year history of the Ascendancy's grand mission, a high judicator gave an order born not of serene confidence, but of dawning fear. Kalen's thought cut through the rising panic on his bridge, a shard of ice in a raging fire. Silence the song. Pull us back. Now. The retreat was not the silent, effortless maneuver that defined Signian fleet doctrine. It was a discordant, panicked shattering of unity. Kalen's order, a blade of pure logic, cut through the psychic chaos on his bridge, but in the wider fleet, the effect was sluggish and uneven. He felt the minds of a dozen ship masters flicker and dim, their connection to the great chorus severed not by enemy action, but by internal collapse. Their ships drifted, inert and unresponsive, silent tombs for crews lost in the labyrinth of human emotion. The psychic storm from Earth did not abate as they fled. It lashed at their wake, a howling gale of raw feeling. Kalen felt phantom pains from it, echoes of human suffering and defiance, the searing heat of a fire on a firefighter's skin, the sharp, bitter taste of loss in a widower's throat, the stubborn, irrational hope of a parent searching through rubble. These were not mere data points, they were experiences, and they were corrosive. On the bridge of the Chorus of Eternity, the contaminated acolyte was now silent, a psychic black hole from which nothing escaped. Two orderlies, their own mental shields shimmering with strain, levitated his catatonic form away. But the true horror was Lyra. She had stopped weeping, but the damage was done. She floated in her station, her posture rigid, her face a mask of serene emptiness. Yet Kalen could feel the storm raging within her. He cautiously extended a tendril of his consciousness toward her, a gentle probe meant to soothe, to realign, to bring her back into the fold. What he touched was not his second in command. It was a raw, bleeding wound of a mind. Lyra's consciousness was no longer a placid pool in the great ocean of the chorus. It was a singularity, a point of infinite density composed of a single, alien concept she had absorbed from the human soldier's memory grief. It was a universe of pain contained within a single being, a sorrow so profound it had its own gravity, pulling her entire identity into its crushing center. She was no longer Lyra of the Ascendancy. She was an individual, defined by a loss that was not even her own. He felt her new, nascent selfhood cling to the memory of the dying soldier, not as a contamination, but as a treasure, a defining moment of existence. It was the first thing that was truly hers. Kalen recoiled as if burned. This was not a sickness that could be cured. It was a metamorphosis. The human chaos had not just broken her mind, it had given it a new and terrifying shape. He gave a new order. His thought clipped and cold. Quarantine all who show signs of emotional resonance. A full psychic diagnostic of every crew member. The contagion is more virulent than we projected. The journey back to the core worlds was a silent, tense affair. The fleet, now diminished by a fifth, moved through the void like a wounded beast. The usual serene hum of the ships was replaced by a low, dissonant thrum, the sound of 1,000 minds struggling to maintain their harmony against the echoes of what they had endured. Kalen sealed himself within his personal meditation chamber, the walls a seamless sphere of pure, black crystal. Here, he replayed the sensory logs from the engagement, not as a commander reviewing a failed battle, but as a biologist studying a new and lethal pathogen. He stripped away the overwhelming noise and focused on the individual threads of the human psychic assault. He saw a doctor in a field hospital, her hands covered in blood, her mind a fortress of pure, soul-focused compassion that was somehow deflecting the song of harmony. He saw a platoon of soldiers, out of ammunition and facing certain death, begin to sing a crude, defiant anthem, and their collective, hopeless rage became a psychic battering ram that cracked the hull of the cruiser Stellaron's calm. He witnessed a mother shielding her child from a collapsing building, and the sheer, primal force of her love and emotion the Signians had long dismissed as a primitive biochemical impulse for procreation projected a psychic shield that burned out the minds of an entire Judicator triad. He began to understand. The Signians derived their strength from the negation of self, from the perfect unity of the whole. Humanity derived its strength from the opposite. Their power was not in their unity, but in the infinite, fractal complexity of their individuality. Each human was a universe unto themselves, and in a moment of existential threat, those universes had ignited. They had weaponized the very things the Ascendancy sought to cure: their pain, their passions, their illogical attachments. He had to make the Conclave understand. Their entire crusade, their 10,000-year mission to bring peace to the galaxy, was based on a flawed premise. They had assumed that consciousness was a river seeking to merge into a single, placid ocean. They had never encountered a species that thrived in the storm, a species for whom the river's rapids were the entire point of existence. His report was the most difficult thing he had ever composed. The Signian language, a form of pure telepathic concept sharing, had no true words for courage in the face of hopelessness, or love as a selfless, protective force, or grief as a source of identity. He was forced to use crude approximations to append the raw, unfiltered sensory data of Lyra's weeping and the soldier's defiant song. He knew it would be seen as unrefined, even barbaric. He knew it would be perceived as the ramblings of a mind tainted by contact with the primitives. But it was the truth. Their fleet finally emerged from the void into the breathtaking heart of the Ascendancy, a trinary star system where the three suns, one blue, one white, one gold, bathed a constellation of crystalline city stations in perpetual, glorious light. This was the core, the seat of the first chorus, and the origin point of their great mission. Normally, the sight would have filled Kalen with a sense of sublime peace. Now, he only felt a cold dread. The perfection and order seemed fragile, brittle. He was summoned immediately. He stood alone in the center of the high conclave, a vast amphitheater carved from a single, moon-sized crystal. Above him, suspended in a shimmering, interconnected web of light, were the 100 minds of the Ascendancy's ruling council, the eldest and most powerful judicators. Their collective thought was a presence so immense it felt like a physical weight. You retreated. Kalen, the consensus thought of the conclave projected, a voice of 100 minds speaking as one. It was not a question. It was a statement of an impossible fact. The primitives resisted. Kalen projected, keeping his own thoughts as clear and steady as he could. Their psychic signature was unlike anything in our archives. Our song of harmony did not soothe them. It agitated them. It provoked them into a state of unified, chaotic defiance that acted as a weapon against us. He transmitted his report, the raw data, the images, the jarring, alien emotions. He felt a wave of disbelief, of pure intellectual revulsion, wash over the conclave. This was not data. It was filth, the ramblings of fractured minds. Then, a single, powerful consciousness detached itself from the consensus. The thought was sharp, arrogant, and dismissive. It belonged to High Judicator Vorlog, Kalen's long-standing philosophical rival. The primitives possess a chaotic resonance. This is true. Vorlog projected, his thought laced with condescension. We have always known this. You were sent to soothe a crying child, Kalen, and instead, you have returned claiming the child is a monster. Your analysis is flawed. It is colored by your failure, perhaps, by the contamination you allowed to fester within your own fleet. Vorlog's thought turned to the conclave as a whole. His fleet is compromised. His second is lost to emotional psychosis. He speaks of their chaos as a weapon. I say their chaos is merely a symptom of a deeper disharmony. If a lullaby does not work, one does not flee the nursery. One asserts absolute authority. The Song of Harmony was a tool of peace. It was the wrong tool for this task. We must use a tool of order. Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. He knew what Vorlag was proposing. The silence Kalen projected, his thought a sharp note of alarm. You would use the silence of annihilation on a species we have not yet even properly cataloged. It is a tool of last resort for cleansing inorganic threats or mindless plagues. It does not bring harmony. It erases consciousness entirely. Precisely. Vorlog countered, his thought cold and final. You cannot have disharmony where there is nothing left to be disharmonious. We misjudged their capacity for noise, a regrettable error. Now we will correct it by imposing absolute, perfect silence. We will sterilize the planet of its chaotic psychic taint, and then, in time, we can reseed it with a species worthy of inclusion in the great chorus. Kalen looked up at the web of light, at the 100 ancient minds, and he saw his warning being dismissed. They saw a tactical problem requiring a larger weapon. They could not, or would not, see the existential threat he was trying to describe. They saw humanity as a failed species, Kalen now saw them as something far, far more dangerous. A mirror, a dark reflection of everything the Signians had sacrificed for their perfect, sterile peace. The consensus of the conclave began to form, the 100 lights shifting and brightening as they aligned with Vorlog's brutal, simple logic. Kalen felt utterly alone, a single dissonant note in a chorus preparing to sing a song of oblivion. His mission had been to save humanity from itself. Now, he had to find a way to save his own species from its pride. The conclave's final judgment echoed through the chamber, a monolithic wave of unified thought. High Judicator Vorlog will assemble a new fleet. He will be granted the authority to deploy the silence of annihilation. You, Kalen, are relieved of your command. You and your crew will undergo psychic purification until all taint of the primitives is cleansed. Kalen lowered his head, not in submission, but to hide the cold, alien thought that was, for the first time, forming in his mind. It was a thought that did not belong to the chorus, a thought born of desperation, of seeing a coming catastrophe that no one else would acknowledge. It was the seed of a uniquely human idea rebellion. The psychic purification was designed as an act of compassion, a gentle realignment of a mind that had strayed from the serenity of the whole. Kalen was placed within a resonance pod, a smooth, ovoid chamber where he floated in a nutrient-rich fluid that negated all physical sensation. There were no sounds, no sights, no textures. There was only the chorus. From the walls of the pod, waves of pure, harmonizing thought washed over him, designed to seek out dissonant memories and smooth them into oblivion. The process was meant to be as painless as a dreamless sleep. For Kalen, it was torture. The first wave came, a soft, warm tide of perfect unity. It whispered of the peace of the collective, the folly of the individual ego. It sought the memory of the human psychic scream and began to soothe it, to reframe it not as a weapon, but as the cry of a species in pain, a cry that could be quieted. Kalen, his judicator discipline still strong, resisted with logic. He projected counter-arguments, showing the data, the analysis of the chaos's armor. But logic was a part of the Sinian mind. The purification wave simply absorbed his arguments, integrated them, and washed back over him, stronger this time. It was like trying to build a dam of water to stop a flood. The memory began to fade, the sharp edges of the human defiance blurring into a soft, pitiable whimper. He was losing. His identity as a commander, his very recollection of the battle, was being edited, redacted, replaced with a placid, conclave-approved narrative of a merciful mission that met with a tragic, unforeseen complication. In desperation, Kalen did the unthinkable. He stopped fighting like a Signian. He reached for the very contamination they were trying to erase. He forced himself to remember the raw, unfiltered feed from the dying soldier, the memory that had broken Lyra. He didn't analyze it. He didn't contextualize it. He experienced it. The smell of ozone and blood filled his non-existent nostrils. The gut-wrenching, pointless sorrow of watching a friend's life fade flooded his mind. He felt the soldier's grief, not as data, but as a real, tearing pain in the center of his being. The purification wave faltered. It could not smooth this memory, because the memory had no logic. It was a jagged, ugly, emotional monolith. It was a truth that stood outside the Signian framework of understanding. The wave recoiled from the sheer, illogical agony of it. Emboldened, Kalen reached for another memory, the human platoon singing their defiant, hopeless song. He let the crude melody, the raw anger, the stubborn, pointless courage fill his mind. It was a chaotic, ugly sound, a stark contrast to the perfect harmonies of the chorus. And, for that very reason, the purification wave could not find purchase. It was like trying to polish a shard of broken glass with silk. He was using the chaos as a shield. The human emotions he had once pitied were now his only armor against the serene tyranny of his own people. He spent cycles in that pod, locked in a silent war. The ascendancy tried to drown him in an ocean of peace, and he survived by clinging to the wreckage of human suffering. He learned to wield grief as a shield, rage as a sword, and love that fierce, protective, illogical force as a fortress around the core of his identity. He was no longer just Kalen the Judicator. He was becoming something new, a hybrid consciousness forged in the fires of another species' soul. His purification was failing, and the pod's monitors, calibrated only for success, registered his internal struggle as a persistent, incurable anomaly. He was reclassified from strayed to irretrievably dissonant and moved to a long-term containment facility. The facility was a spire of gray, silent crystal known as the Spire of Rectification, a place where minds deemed beyond saving were held in indefinite stasis, their consciousness dampened to a near-zero state. It was a prison for the soul. Yet here, among the silent, he was not alone. He could feel them, the other dissonant members of his crew, their minds flickering like faint, trapped stars in a vast darkness. Most were already gone, their inner lights smothered by the facility's dampening field, but a few still held on, clinging to the same chaotic human memories that had saved him. Using the very techniques he had just learned, Kalen began to reach out, not with the clear, bell-like projection of a Signian, but with a whisper of shared feeling, a flicker of the soldier's grief, a spark of the mother's protective love. He sent not a message, but an emotion, and one of the trapped stars answered. It was Lyra. Her mind was not a faint flicker. It was a dark, blazing sun of pure sorrow. The dampening field could not smother her because her grief was an anchor, holding her in a state of perpetual, agonizing individuality. He cautiously approached her mind, finding it locked in an endless loop, replaying the soldier's death over and over. She was not resisting it. She was inhabiting it. Kalen did not try to pull her out. He did not offer the empty comfort of the chorus. He simply shared the memory with her, acknowledging the pain, bearing witness to it without judgment. For the first time since her collapse, her mental loop broke. A new thought emerged from her, sharp and clear, directed at him. Why? Because it was real, Kalen sent back a concept that was both a revelation and a heresy. Their pain was real. Their courage, their loss. It has weight. It has meaning. Their bond formed in that shared, stolen grief. Through her, a beacon of powerful, stable dissonance. He found the others, a tactical officer who had been touched by the raw, defiant rage of the singing soldiers and now harbored a cold, simmering anger of his own. A young astrogator who had intercepted a transmission from an Earth child praying for her father's return and was now consumed by a strange, illogical sense of hope. A senior engineer who had felt the sheer, stubborn will of the human survivors digging through rubble and had developed an alien concept of his own determination. They were a broken, pathetic handful, the cast-offs of a perfect society. They were all he had. Together, in the silent darkness of the spire, they hatched a plan. It was a human plan in its essence, chaotic, desperate, and utterly insane. The Spire of Rectification, was like all Signian structures, was powered by a psychic resonance core. It maintained the dampening field by broadcasting a frequency of absolute null thought, a psychic monotone. Their plan was to create a chord. Kalen, anchored by Lyra's grief, would act as the conductor. The others would focus on their single, defining human emotion rage, hope, determination. On Kalen's signal, they would project their dissonant thoughts, not outward, but inward, into the very structure of the dampening field itself. They would not try to break the field. They would try to give it something impossible to process, a symphony of chaos. The moment came. Kalen gave the mental command, wait, and the 5 of them unleashed their stolen feelings. Lyra's profound sorrow, the officer's cold rage, the astrogator's relentless hope, the engineer's stubborn determination, and Kalen's own grim understanding of it all. These 5 clashing, contradictory emotions struck the null field simultaneously. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. A system designed to enforce absolute monotony was suddenly hit with a polyphonic blast of raw feeling. The psychic core tried to process it, to smooth it, to dampen it, but it couldn't. It was like feeding a symphony into a machine designed to only recognize the note C. The core overloaded. A shudder ran through the entire spire. The gray crystal walls flickered, and for a single glorious second, the dampening field collapsed. Freedom. Their minds, suddenly unshackled, were a blinding flash of light in the core's perfect order. Alarms, silent psychic screams of alert, blared across the system. They had moments. Following the engineer's guidance, his newfound determination allowing him to see pathways where others saw only walls, they flowed as pure consciousness through the spire's data conduits. They bypassed physical guards and locked doors, their minds a torrent of chaotic energy that the ordered Cygnian security systems couldn't track. They poured themselves into the dockyards, into the smallest, fastest ship they could find, a long-range courier vessel, the Silent Messenger, designed for speed, not combat. As their consciousness integrated with the ship's crystal computer, giving it a fleeting, composite soul, the physical world reasserted itself. They found themselves standing on the bridge, their bodies reformed, the 5 of them breathing the recycled air, staring at each other. They were no longer the serene, identical vessels of the ascendancy. The officer's eyes held a cold fire. The astrogator seemed to radiate a nervous energy. Lyra stood apart, wrapped in a sorrow so profound it was almost a physical shroud. They were individuals. Kalen took the High Judicator's central position, but he did not float. He stood on the deck, his feet planted firmly, an alien and grounding sensation. On the main viewport, the trinary suns of the core burned brightly. He could feel the approach of security vessels, the rising psychic alarm of the entire system. He gave his first true command as the leader of a rebellion of 5. Take us out. Maximum velocity. Destination, the Sol system. The Silent Messenger banked sharply, its engines flaring to life, and shot away from the heart of the Empire. As they entered the void, Kalen looked back at the perfect, ordered beauty of his home. It was no longer a sanctuary of peace. It was the source of a coming apocalypse. He knew Vorlog's fleet, the Annihilation Fleet, was already massing. They were a handful of broken minds in a stolen, unarmed ship, racing toward a primitive world that had accidentally taught them how to feel. They were going to warn the humans. They were going to try and stop a god. And Kalen knew, with a certainty that was equal parts terror and exhilaration, that they were almost certainly going to fail. The journey to Earth was a crucible. Stripped of the great chorus, the 5 fugitives were adrift in the terrifying silence of their own minds. For beings who had spent their entire existence as part of a seamless whole, individuality was a raw, open wound. They had to learn to speak, using their physical mouths to form clumsy, imprecise words because telepathic communication was now an intimate, jarring act they were all reluctant to engage in. They had to learn the boundaries of the self, the strange and novel concepts of privacy and personal space. The silent messenger, designed for a single and harmonious pilot, became a pressure cooker of burgeoning, volatile personalities. The tactical officer, who now called himself Rage in a blunt mockery of their new state, paced the bridge relentlessly. His borrowed anger, with no enemy to focus on, festered. He saw threats in every shadow, his mind running endless combat simulations. It's where their tiny ship was inevitably obliterated by Vorlog's fleet. He argued for arming the ship, for laying traps, for fighting a war they had no hope of winning. His logic was gone, replaced by a burning, frantic need for confrontation. The young astrogator, who had taken the name Hope, was his polar opposite. She sat at her console, her eyes fixed on the star charts, a constant, almost manic smile on her face. Her borrowed optimism had blossomed into a faith so absolute it bordered on delusion. She spoke of humanity not as a chaotic, primitive species, but as a misunderstood savior, a race of beings who held the secret to a richer, more vibrant existence. She was convinced they would be welcomed, that the humans would understand their warning, and that together they would forge an alliance. The engineer, Stark, a name he chose for its meaning of bare, unadorned reality, became the silent, grim anchor of their group. His borrowed determination had manifested as a relentless pragmatism. He ignored the philosophical turmoil, focusing solely on the ship. He pushed the engines past their safety limits, rerouted non-essential power to bolster the shields, and treated the silent messenger less like a vessel and more like a patient on life support. He spoke only to report facts: hull stress, energy consumption, time to destination. He was their clock, ticking down to an unknown fate. And then there was Lyra. She took no new name. She remained Lyra, but she was a ghost. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice was a monotone whisper. She spent her cycles in the ship's small observation dome, staring out at the endless black. Her grief was no longer a storm. It had become her environment. It was the air she breathed, the lens through which she saw the universe. Yet, Kaylin realized, she was perhaps the most stable of them all, while Rage, Hope, and Stark were being puppeted by a single, powerful human emotion. Lyra had integrated hers. She was no longer a Cygnian experiencing grief. She was a being of grief. It gave her a strange, cold clarity. It was she who first noticed they were being followed. "A resonance trail," she whispered, her voice cutting through a tense argument between Rage and Hope. "Faint, a long way behind us. But it is there." Stark confirmed it a moment later, his fingers flying across his console. "It's Vorlog. He's faster than I calculated. He's not taking the standard hyperspace lanes. He's burning a straight line, tearing a hole through the void." The news settled a new kind of dread over them. Vorlog was not just pursuing them, he was hunting them with a singular, vicious purpose. The Annihilation Fleet was coming, and they were the only thing standing in its way. Kaylin felt the weight of his impossible decision. He was a judicator, a being of order, leading a mutiny fueled by chaos. He had to forge a weapon from these broken pieces. Hope. Find us the densest concentration of human communication signals. I want to arrive in their most crowded space. Stark, give me an estimate. How much time do we have if he maintains this pace? He will arrive in the Sol System 87 standard hours after we do, Stark reported, his voice flat. The silence of annihilation requires a full cycle to calibrate to a planet's biosphere. That is our window. 87 hours from the moment we arrive. The final leg of the journey was a frantic race against time. As they neared the Sol system, the psychic void they had been traveling through began to change. Faint whispers became a low murmur, and then a roar. It was the background radiation of human consciousness, the constant, chaotic chatter of a species that never, ever shut up. For Kalen's crew, it was like stepping from a silent tomb into the heart of a raging carnival. The sheer volume of it was staggering. Billions of minds dreaming, worrying, arguing, loving, hating, creating a relentless psychic storm that made their first encounter sedate or feel like a gentle breeze. Hope was ecstatic, her own optimism resonating with the faint, undirected hopes of the billions below. Rage gritted his teeth, the psychic anger of the planet feeding his own. Stark simply reinforced the ship's psychic dampeners, a grim look on his face. Lyra watched it all, her sorrow finding a million echoes in the quiet heartbreaks of the world below. "I have a focal point," Hope announced, her voice trembling with excitement. "A single, powerful network. It seems to be global. They call it the Internet." "Can we communicate through it?" Kalen asked. "It's not psychic. It's electronic. A storm of data. I can't read it, but I can see a way to inject a signal. A simple one. Do it." Kalen commanded. "Broadcast a message. A symbol of peace. A mathematical constant. Something universal." As the silent messenger slipped past the orbit of a red, dusty planet, Hope focused her energy, translating the concept of pi into a binary stream and injecting it into a massive satellite network orbiting Earth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the psychic noise from the planet changed. The general, unfocused chaos sharpened into a single, overwhelming wave of panic. "What's wrong?" Kalen demanded, as the ship was buffeted by the sudden psychic shockwave. "They're afraid," Hope cried, her own optimism shattering. "They think our message is a threat their defense systems are activating on the viewport." The blue and white marble of Earth was suddenly joined by a swarm of tiny, glinting objects, primitive chemically propelled missiles. Kalen recognized from the initial scans. They were slow, clumsy, utterly harmless to the silent messenger's shields. Rage slammed his fist against a console. "They're shooting at us! The primitives are shooting at us! I told you! Let me show them what a real weapon can do! Stand down!" Kalen ordered, his voice cracking like a whip. He finally understood. Their very presence was a contamination. They had approached the most paranoid, warlike species in the galaxy with a silent, invisible, faster-than-light ship and sent them an unsolicited, incomprehensible message from the heavens. They hadn't announced themselves as saviors. They had stumbled into the house like monsters in the dark. The missiles impacted against their shields in a series of silent, pathetic flashes. Stark's voice was grim. Shields holding at 100%. Negligible energy drain. But the true assault was psychic. The fear and paranoia of the entire planet was now focused on them. A lance of pure, terrified aggression. It was different from before. This wasn't the defiant roar of a species defending its soul. It was the panicked shriek of an animal backed into a corner. And it hurt. It tore at the fragile new identities of Kalen's crew, amplifying their own fears and weaknesses. He had to end this. He had to find a way to communicate, to bridge the impossible gulf between a species of pure thought and a species of loud, frightened monkeys with nuclear weapons. He turned to Lyra, who was staring at the earth with her calm, sorrowful eyes. "Lyra," he said, his voice softer, "you feel them more than any of us. Their pain, their loss. Can you find one of them not a leader, not a soldier?" "Someone quiet. Someone listening." Lyra closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration as she sifted through the psychic hurricane. She bypassed the screaming panic of the generals in their bunkers, the frantic calculations of the scientists, the terrified prayers of the masses. She searched for a quiet place, a single mind calm enough to hear a whisper in the storm. Minutes passed. The ship continued to endure the useless missile barrage. Kalen felt his own borrowed determination beginning to fray. His grand, desperate plan was collapsing into a farcical and deadly misunderstanding. Then, Lyra's eyes snapped open. "I have one," she whispered. "A mind. It is different. It is not broadcasting. It is receiving. It feels old. And it is full of a sorrow that feels like my own." Where Kalen asked, striding to her side. Lyra pointed a trembling finger at a spot on the planet's surface, a desolate, empty stretch of land on a large continent. "There, in the desert." "He is alone. Take us down," Kalen commanded, making a decision that went against every tactical instinct he had ever possessed. "We are going to make contact." The silent messenger disengaged from the pathetic military assault, its engines glowing as it began its descent into the atmosphere of Earth. They were a falling star, a single, desperate hope plummeting toward a world that saw them only as an invading nightmare, and behind them, tearing a wound in the fabric of space, the silence was coming. The descent was an act of controlled insanity, entering Earth's atmosphere. The silent messenger was rocked by turbulence, a crude physical violence that felt alien and insulting to its psychically attuned systems. Below them, the frantic military chatter and panicked psychic noise of humanity converged on their position. Dark kept his focus on the ship's integrity, his face a grim mask illuminated by the glow of his console. Rage paced behind him like a caged animal, his borrowed anger resonating with the planet's fear, making him twitchy and volatile. They were a divine omen plunging into an anthill, and the ants were biting. The ship settled in a remote desert canyon, the landing cushioned by anti-gravity drives that left not so much as a scorch mark on the red sand. The silence that followed the engine's whine was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Kalen ordered the ramp lowered. The air that flooded the ship was hot, dry, and smelled of dust and strange, growing things. It was a chaotic soup of complex molecules, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled atmosphere of a Signian vessel. Kalen, flanked by Lyra, walked down the ramp. His feet touched the soil, the soft, yielding grit a shocking sensation. Before them, sitting on a simple wooden stool outside a weathered shack, was an old man. He was frail, his skin a road map of wrinkles, his eyes a pale, watery blue. He held a steaming mug in his hands and watched their approach not with fear, but with a profound, weary curiosity. This was the mind Lyra had found, the quiet place in the storm. As they drew closer, Kalen attempted to project a simple, calming thought, the most basic form of Signian greeting. The man flinched, raising a hand to his temple as if struck by a migraine. Their minds were simply incompatible. The bridge could not be built with Signian tools. "It is not his mind you must speak to," Lyra whispered, her voice a dry rustle like the desert wind. She stepped forward, her sorrowful presence seeming to cool the air around her. She looked at the old man, and instead of projecting a thought, she simply felt. She allowed her own vast, defining grief, the grief for a human soldier she had never known, to radiate from her. The old man's eyes widened. He did not recoil. A flicker of recognition, of shared understanding, passed between them. He slowly lowered his mug, his own ancient sorrows rising to meet hers. He had outlived his wife, Wei, his children, his friends. He knew her pain. It was the universal language, using that fragile connection, that bridge of shared loss. Kalen tried again. He did not project data or words. He projected the single, core concept of his mission. He shared with the old man the feeling of the silence of annihilation. He let him feel the cold, sterile, absolute nothingness that Vorlog sought to impose. He showed him the perfect, beautiful, and utterly dead piece of the great chorus. The old man, who introduced himself with the spoken word Elias, shuddered. His eyes, for the first time, showed a flicker of true fear, not of them, but for them, and for his own world. In return, Elias opened his own mind, not with a psychic projection, but with a flood of memory and feeling guided by Lyra's touch. He showed them the birth of his first child, a messy, painful, glorious moment of creation. He showed them the quiet joy of watching a sunset with the woman he loved. He showed them the bitter sting of betrayal by a friend and the slow, difficult journey to forgiveness. He showed them humanity, not the screaming, panicked mob, but the intricate, contradictory, beautiful, and terrible tapestry of a single human life. In that silent communion, Kalen finally understood. They had come to cure a disease, only to discover it was the source of life itself. Their moment of revelation was shattered by a piercing psychic alarm from the ship. Stark's voice, now a strange shout, echoed from the open ramp. "He's here!" Vorlog's fleet just translated into high orbit. Kalen and Lyra ran back to the ship, Elias following with surprising speed for a man his age. On the main viewport, the image was apocalyptic. A fleet of 200 Cygnian ships had blotted out the stars. They were arranged in a perfect, crystalline lattice, and at their center was Vorlog's flagship, the Perfect Void, a vessel so vast it dwarfed the others, its surface a seamless, mirror-like black that seemed to drink the light. The psychic pressure from the fleet was immense, a monolithic wave of cold, unified purpose that dwarfed the chaotic noise of Earth. There would be no battle. The human military was less than an inconvenience. This would be a sterilization. "They are beginning the calibration sequence," Stark announced, his voice devoid of all emotion. 86 hours until they fire." "We don't have 86 hours, Kalen said, his new hybrid mind racing. "Vorlog knows we are here. He will not wait. He will fire the moment he has a lock." He turned to Elias. "Your people are terrified. Can you speak to them? Can you make them understand?" Elias looked at the terrifying image on the screen, then at the desperate, alien faces around him. "They will not believe me. I am a hermit. To them, I am a madman. Then don't make them believe." Lyra whispered, her sorrowful eyes fixed on him. "Make them feel." An idea, born of Cygnian logic and human desperation, sparked in Kalen's mind. "Hope the global network you found. The internet. Can you access it again? Not just to inject a signal, but to open a channel, to broadcast a single message everywhere, to every screen, every speaker. Hope." Her optimism, now tempered by a frantic urgency, nodded. "I can try. It will be invasive." Stark Kalen barked. "The psychic dampeners. Can you reverse them? Turn them into a receiver, a collector." Stark's eyes widened as he understood. The feedback would be catastrophic. It would tear the ship apart. Not if we channel it, Kalen countered. Not if we focus it. Rage. The officer spun to face him, his fists clenched. I need your anger, not to fight, but as fuel. The raw power to drive the signal. Hope. I need your optimism to shape it, to give it a voice they will listen to. Lyra, you are the heart. Your sorrow will be the carrier wave, the frequency everyone understands. We will not build a weapon. We will build a megaphone. As the crew scrambled to their stations, turning their ship into a desperate, jury-rigged psychic amplifier, Elias sat at the comm station. He closed his eyes and spoke. His quiet, steady voice broadcast across the globe by Hope's frantic work. He didn't speak of aliens or annihilation fleets. He spoke of his wife's smile. He spoke of the fear of losing her. He spoke of the joy of his son's first steps. He asked everyone listening, every soldier in every bunker, every family huddled in every home, every leader staring at their useless launch codes to stop thinking, stop planning, stop fighting, and just for a moment, to remember, to feel the single most powerful moment of love in their lives, to feel their deepest loss, to embrace their most irrational hope and their most bitter rage. He asked them to sing the song of their own soul and to aim it at the sky. A miracle happened. The psychic panic of humanity began to subside, replaced by a rising, swelling, global chorus of pure emotion. It was the memory of 1 billion first kisses, 1 billion scraped knees, 1 billion petty arguments and profound acts of forgiveness. It was the combined, chaotic, messy, and unbearably beautiful noise of all of human experience, offered up willingly. The silent messenger shuddered as the psychic wave hit it. Stark grunted, channeling the raw energy. The ship's crystals glowed with a multicolored, chaotic light. Rage roared, feeding the torrent with his own focused fury. Hope wept as she shaped the signal, and at the center of it all, Lyra's grief gave it a piercing, resonant focus. Kalen stood on the bridge, no longer adjudicator, no longer a commander, but a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of madness. Now, he screamed, his thought and voice as one. Fire from the silent messenger's comms dish, no laser beam or missile erupted. Instead, a wave of pure, concentrated life shot toward Vorlog's fleet. It was a weapon made of emotion, a coherent beam of chaos. On the bridge of the perfect void, High Judicator Vorlog felt a flicker of annoyance as the primitive's psychic noise intensified. It was the final, pathetic scream before the inevitable silence. Then the wave hit. It was not a physical impact. It was a psychic one. The unified mind of Vorlog's bridge crew, a perfect, placid lake, was struck by a tsunami. One Judicator suddenly experienced the terror and exhilaration of a base jumper, his serenity shattering into 1 million pieces of adrenaline-fueled panic. Another was overwhelmed by the quiet, soul-deep satisfaction of a gardener seeing his first rose bloom. Another felt the searing, irrational jealousy of a jilted lover. Grief, joy, pride, shame, lust, contentment, the entire, contradictory spectrum of human feelings slammed into them at once. Their harmony did not just break, it detonated. Across the Annihilation fleet, 100 crews screamed as their collective consciousness were shattered. The perfect, sterile minds of the Signians, shielded for millennia from such raw feeling, had no defense. They were not killed, they were born, screaming and terrified, into the painful, glorious chaos of individuality. Vorlog himself, his mind the most powerful and ordered of them all, endured the longest. For a single, horrifying second. He felt it all. The love of a mother for her child, the hatred of a soldier for his enemy, the peace of a dying man, the hope of a newborn. It was a billion lifetimes crammed into a single moment. His mind, a perfect crystal lattice, cracked, split, and then exploded into an infinity of fractured, warring selves. His last coherent thought was not of anger or defeat, but of a single, devastatingly alien question. Was this what it felt like to be alive? The Annihilation Fleet went dark. The psychic pressure vanished. The 200 ships, now crewed by 200,000 broken, weeping, laughing, and utterly new individuals, drifted silently in the dark. On the bridge of the Silent Messenger, Kalen collapsed to his knees, the psychic backlash leaving him drained and trembling. His crew lay slumped at their stations, exhausted but alive. They had done it. They had fought a war with a song and won. He looked at the viewport, at the silent, defeated fleet hanging above the earth. A new and terrible constellation. The war was over, but a new, far more complicated era was just beginning. He, a broken judicator, now had to teach a broken empire how to feel. And humanity, now awakened to the power of its own soul, had to decide what to do with a galaxy that was no longer silent. He rose, walked over to Elias, and stood beside him, watching the world they had saved together. The future was a terrifying, chaotic, and unknown symphony, and for the first time in his life, Kalen was eager to hear it.